In this video, we're going to illustrate how to create dependent drop-down lists or dependent data validation lists in Excel. So here we have a system of data validation lists where if you select a certain continent on the first data validation list, the second data validation list will only contain the countries under that particular continent and not any other countries. As you can see here, we've created two levels of data validation lists. The first level contains the continents, and the second level contains the countries under that particular continent. So when you change the continent to another one, you will only get the countries under that particular continent, and we're going to explain how to do that in any version in Excel. So we're going to provide an any version solution, and also we're going to provide an Excel 365 solution that works only on Excel 365 because it involves the use of the new dynamic arrays in Excel. We're going to show as well how to create a conditional formatting like this to show that the selection on the second level of data validation does not belong to the first level of data validation. So this is going to be an interesting video, and without further ado, let's get started. All right, so let's start with the solution that works with any version in Excel. So we're going to lay out our data like this. Here is the level 1 list, and then here are the level 2 lists, as you can see. We're going to create a table out of each list. So I'm going to select my data and press Ctrl and T on my keyboard. And for this table, I'm going to name it TBL continents. For example, I like to give a TBL prefix to my table names so that I know that this is a table. You can name it anything that you would like. So I'll name it TBL continents. And then for this one, I'm going to name it with the name of the continent. You would have to name it with the name of the element in the level 1 list here. So for this, I'm going to name this table Africa. You have to do that so that our solution would work. And I'm going to give it a different color, black color, for example, because this is a level 2 list. And I'm going to create another table from this one as well. And this is going to be Europe. Gonna give it a black color as well. And this one is going to be Asia, and let's give it a black color as well. So we've created a table out of each of our lists. So you would lay your lists like this. This is level 1, and then you would lay level 2 lists as well. And the critical part here is to name the level 2 lists as the same entry in level 1. So this is the Africa list here. It has to be named exactly as the Africa entry on level 1, and Europe and Asia the same way as well. The second step is to create a named range from the entries or the values for level 1. So we're going to select the values for level 1 without selecting the header, and then you're going to create a named range out of that. So to do that, you can go here to the name box here and then create a named range. I'll name it RNG continents, for example. You can name it anything. I'll just give it the prefix RNG so that you know that this is a named range. And you can also go to the Formulas tab on the ribbon, go to Name Manager, and you can click on New here and write the name of the range, RNG continents in our case, and select these values. So this is going to do the same thing as well. So basically create a named range out of the values on level 1. This is our second step. The third step is to create the data validation list for level 1. So I'm going to select this cell here and then go to data and then data validation. And then here I'm going to select list. And for the source is going to be in the named range that we created, which is the RNG continents named range. So I'm going to press F3 here, click on RNG continents, click OK, and then OK again. And this will make the source of our data validation list basically the values inside our named range. And because our named range is covering a table, so whenever we add more continents here, as we will see, this will also be automatically added into our data validation list. Now let's create the level 2 data validation list. How can we do that? We can do that using the indirect function. So I'm going to select here this cell and then go to data and then data validation. And then here I'm going to select list, and our source for this data validation list is going to be equals indirect. And if you don't know how the indirect function works, I have a video about it, so I'll leave you the link down below in the description. And here we're going to select that the indirect function basically takes the name in this cell here, which is B5, but we need to make sure to only fix the column reference. So to make only the column reference fixed, and the row reference would move because we're going to move vertically with this formula when we extend the data validation lists. So I'll press OK here, and this will basically make the source for our data validation list the table that is named Africa. And when we select Europe here, the source will change to be the table named Europe, and for Asia, it's going to be the table named Asia, and so on and so forth. We can also extend our data validation lists like this to have multiple rows with data validation lists. All right, now let's try adding another continent to make sure our system works. So I'm going to add Australia, for example, and I need to make sure to create a table named Australia, and under Australia we have Australia and New Zealand, right? So these are the countries that we have in the Australia continent, and we'll create a table out of that, and make sure to mark this table as having headers, because here Excel is confused because the table header is named Australia and the first entry as well in the table is named Australia, so it doesn't know which one is the header. I'll press OK here, and I'll give it a black color as well because this is a level 2 list. So after creating the Australia table, we need to make sure to name it Australia as well. And now if we check our level 1 data validation list, you'll see here that there's Australia and there are the countries under Australia as well. All right, so far so good. Everything is working, but how about we try to add North America? And we'll create a table named North America. So I'll create a table named North America here, and under North America, I'll put USA, I'll put Canada, and I'll put Mexico. And I'll change that to a table. I'll make it an official Excel table, press OK, and let's try to name the table here North America and see what happens. Actually, we get an error. The syntax of this name is not correct, and this is because table names cannot have spaces in them. So how can we get around that issue? Well, we can just name it North America, all one word, without having any spaces. Now let's try our data validation lists for North America. So select here North America. This one works. However, the level 2 data validation list does not work. So there's an issue here. There's a problem that we need to deal with. And the reason we're having this problem, let's also make that black as well so that we keep consistent color for level 2. So the reason we're having this issue here is that the indirect function that we have here as the source of our data validation list is referencing the name of the table without a space, while the entry here in the continents table does have a space. So how can we get around this issue? Well, we can use the substitute function. So I'll build a formula here. I'm not going to use it in this cell. I'm just building it in this cell so that you understand what I'm doing. So use the substitute function. And what does the substitute function do? The substitute function, you can give it a text and it can replace something in that text with some other thing, with a different thing as well. So which text do we need to make replacements in? It's actually the name of the continent. This is what we need to make a replacement in, and I'll absolute the column, and then the old text that we need to replace is basically the space. So we don't want continent names to have any spaces so that we can accommodate table names that don't have any spaces, right? So we want to replace the space with no space. So here a space is basically a double quote and then space and then double quote is going to be replaced with no space, which is basically two double quotes just glued together without any space. And then we'll close our bracket and press enter, and this will basically substitute any spaces in our continent name. So if we drag the formula down, and this way it will cover North America, you will see here that Now North America does not have any spaces. So we'll use this formula, but we will use it inside the indirect function, so that the indirect function basically references the North America table that doesn't have any space in its name. This is the formula we want to use in our data validation list on level 2 instead. So select all our level 2 data validation lists here, and then we'll go to data and then data validation, and we'll paste that formula here and press OK. And now our data validation lists in these cells will contain the new formula. And you can see here that now for North America on level 2, the data validation list actually opens up and it gives us the correct countries for North America. So now we've solved that problem. And if you add any other continent with spaces in it, it will work provided you just do the same thing. So this problem is solved. So we have only one problem here remaining, which is that if we select a different continent here, we'll have the country remaining from the previous continent that we had on level 1 on level 2. So because we had here North America previously, when we selected Africa, we still have here USA, which is not the correct entry. We can definitely change it, but what if we need something to remind us or warn us that this is not a valid level 2 entry for Africa, right? Because USA is not in Africa. So if we need to do that, we can do that using conditional formatting. And what we're going to do is that we're going to take this formula here for level 2, and we're going to use a count if function here. So we're going to use a count if, and the range that we're going to count in is basically this formula here that will give us the countries for that particular continent, and we want to count the currently selected country in that continent. We want to check how many entries of that country is in that particular continent, and if there is an entry that it should give us a 1, then we are having the correct country, and if it's not, then we're having the incorrect country. Let's try that. So you can see here that now it gives us a 1, but if we choose a different continent, which is the wrong continent, it will give us a 0. And if you don't know how the count if function works, I have a video about it, and I'll leave you the link below in the description. All right, so we're going to copy this formula here, and we're going to highlight these cells for level 2, and we're going to go to the Home tab on the ribbon, go to Conditional Formatting, and we're going to create a new rule, and we're going to use a formula to determine which cells to format, and we're going to check if this formula is equal to 0. So this is the rule that we're going to check conditional formatting based upon, and if this is true, then this means that the country selected does not belong to the continent in level 1, and so we should get a warning. I'll make the fill red here, and the font is going to be bold and it's going to be white. So this is going to be our conditional formatting here, and we're going to click OK. And as you can see here, we get a red conditional formatting when we don't have the correct country, as you can see here. But if we select the correct country, we don't get a red conditional formatting. So here, if we select North America, USA is in North America, then we also don't get a conditional formatting. And as you can see here as well, when it's blank, then the conditional formatting also gets applied. You can also make a small change to that formula. So you can say that if is blank, if this is blank, then give me a blank value. Otherwise, create this test here and click OK. And as you can see here, now if the cell is blank, then the conditional formatting is not going to work as well. So now, as you can see here, whenever we select a continent, if we select the correct country, we don't get a conditional formatting. And if we select a different continent and we have the wrong country, the conditional formatting gets triggered. So this is the solution that works in any version in Excel. Now let's examine the solution that's going to work only in Office 365. All right, guys, so now we're going to discuss the Excel 365 solution. And this solution, I got it inspired from Minda Tracy's video from myonlinetraininghub.com. So a big shout out to her. And I've just added a small twist to her solution to make it a little bit more dynamic. So for this solution, we'll be starting by having the continents and the countries laid out in a single table like this. And we're going to create an Excel table out of it. So we're going to select a cell in our data here, and we're going to press Control and T on our keyboard, and we're going to press OK to create the Excel table. And then we're going to name that table here. Let's name it TBL regions. And the next step is to get a unique list of our continents here. So to do that, we're going to use the unique function, so equals unique, and we're going to give it the continent column on our table here, and close the brackets, press enter, and this will give us a unique list of our continents. We can also sort that list here using the sort function. So if you nest that inside the sort function, this will sort our values here, and we can also lay them out horizontally instead of vertically by using the transpose function. So we're going to nest that inside the transpose function as well. And now we have our continents laid out horizontally instead of being laid out vertically. Now, this is a dynamic array formula, and one of the characteristics of dynamic array formulas is that they result in spilled ranges. So you can see here that the results spill across the cells here in the columns. So for a dynamic array formula, if you write equals and then refer to this cell here, I4, and then we're going to also need to absolute the reference as well, because we're going to use this formula in our data validation list, and we need the reference for the cell to be fixed as the formula goes down. So as you can see here, if we write equals I4 and fix the reference here, press enter, we will only get Africa. But because this is a dynamic array formula, if we put a hash sign at the end, this will give us the whole spilled range here. So if we press enter, you can see here that we get the whole spilled range of values. And if we add more continents to the table, and because this formula is referring to the continent column on the table, then the spilled range will expand and we'll have the rest of the values of the continents. So if you add South America, for example, or Australia, this will add the values here to the spilled range. So this is the formula we're going to use on our first level of data validation. So I'm going to select my cells here, and we're going to go to data and then data validation here, and we're going to select a list, and the source for that list is going to be this formula here, and we're going to press OK. And as you can see here, we get a list of our continents in these data validation lists here. So the first level of data validation is now done. We can now delete this formula in this cell here because we don't need it anymore. And then for the second level of data validation, we're going to start by getting the countries under each continent. So equals filter, we're going to use the filter function here, and we're going to filter the countries. So the country column in the table for the continent being equal to this continent on this cell, and we're going to close the brackets and press enter. And as you can see here, we get the countries under Africa. We can also sort that list of countries here by using the sort function. So as you can see here, now the countries are sorted, and because this is a dynamic array formula, it's written only in cell I5. It's not written in the rest of the cells. It's just there is a spilled array here that is spilled across the rest of the cells, but the formula is only existing in cell I5. We can now copy this formula here to get the countries under the rest of the continents. So you can see here under Asia, we got only India because it's the only country that we have here in Asia. And then in Europe, we get the countries under Europe. And then in North America, we also get the countries under North America. So we managed to get the countries under each continent. Now we're going to build the formula that we're going to use in the data validation list for the second level. And this is where I made a small twist here. So for this formula, we're going to use the XLOOKUP function, and with this XLOOKUP, we're going to look up the continent here, and let's make sure to absolute the column reference as well, because this formula is going to exist in the country column here. So we're going to look up the value for the continent, and we're going to look it up in this array here. And as you can see here, when we select all the continents, full array of continents, you can see here we get I4 and then hash. Let's make sure as well that this I4 is absolute. because if it's not absolute, the reference is going to move as we drag the formula for the second data validation list down. So let's make sure that I4 is absolute. And then the return array is going to be the first value in the list of countries under each continent. And if we get the first value only, and let's make sure as well to absolute the reference here for the 4 cells containing the first value here, and close the brackets. And if we press enter, you can see here that we only get the first country here under the continent selected. So we're referring actually to Africa here in cell B5. This is what we're looking up. If we select Asia, we'll only get the only country in Asia, and Europe will get the first country, and so on. However, if we put a hash sign, and this is one of the characteristics of dynamic array formulas, and if you'd like me to make videos about dynamic arrays, let me know in the comments. So if we put a hash sign here and press enter, you can see here that we get the full list of countries. However, if we add another continent and country, so let's add, for example, South America here, and let's add Brazil. So this is a new continent and a new country. You can see here that we get a value error, and the reason we get this value error is that this red lookup array here is 5 cells wide, and the return array is only 4 cells wide. And this is because the return array is not dynamic. It's not become 5 rows just like the lookup array. So after copying this formula, you'd still get a value error. So to fix that, we will need to extend that range here. We'll need to extend it in order to fix the formula. So this is a manual fix that you can apply to the formula to make it work. However, there is another more dynamic fix that you can use, which is using the offset function. So for the offset function, you're going to get the return array from the lookup array, or based on the lookup array. So you're going to give it your lookup array range here, which is the I4 hash, and then you're going to move 1 row down and 0 columns. You can just close the brackets here and press enter. And as you can see here, now you have a more dynamic range. So if you add Australia, for example, as a new continent, and then add Australia as a country under it, and you just copy this formula. So all you need to do is to copy this formula, and you can see here that everything has reacted dynamically. So as long as you just copy this formula, you don't need to extend the return array. So as you can see here, if we select Australia, everything works fine here. So this is going to be our formula that we're going to use in order to create the second level of data validation list. So if we select our cells here, go to data and then data validation, and then it's going to be a list here. And this is going to be the source. This formula is going to be the source, and we're going to click OK. You can see here that we get the correct values for each continent. If you select Europe, we get the correct values, and we can keep on adding more continents as long as we just copy the formula here, the sort and filter formula, to the new column that is going to be created as a result of having an extra continent. It's a small twist. It just saves you the step of extending the return array, because you're going to base the return array on the lookup array. You're just going to offset 1 row down so that they are always of the same width. And we can then apply a conditional formatting. So for example, just like we've done on the solution for any version here, where we apply the conditional formatting, if we select Africa here, we'll still have Australia as the country. This is because Australia is remaining from having Australia selected as a continent. So we can apply a conditional formatting to these cells in order to give us a warning that the selection on level 2 does not conform with the selection on level 1, just like we did on the any version solution. So to do that, we can use a count if function here, and the range where we're going to count is going to be this XLOOKUP formula here, but let's just remove the equal sign here, and then the criteria is going to be the country that we have selected here, and let's make sure to absolute the column as well here. close the brackets, press enter. So if it's equal to 0, then we don't have the right country selected. If we have the right country selected, then it's going to be equal to 1. So we're going to test that this formula is equal to 0. So we can just select our range where we want to apply the conditional formatting, and then go to conditional formatting and then new rule here. And we're going to use a formula to determine which cells to format. And this is going to be the formula here. And we're going to test that this is equal to 0. And then the format is going to be a bold font and a white font as well, and the fill is going to be red, and then press OK again. And as you can see here, now if we have the correct country selected, then we don't get a conditional formatting. But if we don't have the correct country under the continent selected, then we get that conditional formatting triggered, and we get the country being colored in red, as you can see here, to just warn us that the second level of data validation does not conform with the first level of data validation. As you can see here, Morocco is not under Asia, so this is why we get the conditional formatting triggered. And that's it, guys, for this video. I'd like to thank again Minda Tracy from My Online Training Hub YouTube channel for inspiring me for this solution. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to get notified about all the new videos, and make sure to like the video and share it with your friends as well. Thank you so much, and I'll see you on the next one.